All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to DeFi Nation. I'm Clayton Roche. I'm the head of DeFi with Mosendo, and I'm here with Tom Howard, who is the CSO of Mosendo, and Rahul Sethuram, who is the CTO of Connext Network. So we're going to talk a bit about Connext Network and what they are bringing to the Ethereum network and why they're specifically important for the usability of DeFi products. Rahul, would you just give us a little background maybe of what's going on with the Ethereum network and what Connext does with that?
Yeah, sure. Really great to be here. Really like working with you guys, and DeFi Nation is an awesome thing. So just excited to be here. First of all, with Connext, we've first and foremost, our vision has always been, since we started like 2 years ago, has always been how do we increase usability within Ethereum. So we've actually gone through like multiple iterations of what that actually looks like. Like when we first started out, our service looked completely different. What we wanted to do was we wanted to build basically like a fiat on-ramp, a credit card-based fiat on-ramp for buying tokens, because we said the barrier to entry for buying tokens is the biggest thing that's stopping Ethereum adoption right now. That was our main thesis when we started 2 years ago. That was in the midst of ICOs, and there were tokens everywhere. Everyone had all these different tokens, and nobody knew how to buy these tokens and use them. So we were like, okay, well, DApp usage is going to be, I have to buy tokens, and I have to use these tokens within the DApp. So how do I get these tokens? And of course, when we went along with that thesis, we ran into a lot of issues along the way, which was like involving a lot of bank regulations, things like that, as well as the fact that tokens just kind of like crashed and nobody really uses tokens or needs to use tokens anymore. And what we learned actually from like interviewing various dApps and all these companies is that they were actually not even ready for mainstream user adoption because the Ethereum network itself wouldn't scale. So then we said, okay, well, then we need to solve the scalability problem first. So that's where we started doing a lot of research into layer 2 and ended up figuring out that state channel networks are probably the best way to scale Ethereum right now for the purposes of mainstream user adoption.
Okay, that's great. So let's unwind that a little bit. So you mentioned this issue about Ethereum not scaling. So Ethereum is the main public blockchain. And
Correct.
maybe describe what the issues are with not scaling and just what that means.
Sure. So Ethereum is basically like a global consensus-based blockchain network, right? So in order to get transactions onto the network, you have to get global consensus, which takes, as you know, it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot of money. So when a lot of these transactions came through at the same time, probably a couple of years ago, when the first big like dApp was being used, which was CryptoKitties,
right,
it basically brought down the entire network and showed that really that this network is not ready for any type of like real world scale. Like for example, Visa does like thousands of transactions a second and like all day 24/7, peak at like, hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. Ethereum, I think, was doing like 15 transactions a second. So basically that gives you kind of an idea of like what the scale is of Ethereum, where it was at then, and what it needs to be in order to be competitive with something like a global scale platform like Visa.
Sure.
So that's kind of where the scalability issue exists today.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for explaining that.
So back in like January, February, me and Roscoe, who started Mosendo, were researching how we could build something like this, and we came across DAI, and that was super interesting because it was kind of the first time that a stable medium of exchange that was still a censorship-resistant cryptocurrency was available, and there were around 88 million DAI at the time. So that meant that that amount of money is something that can viably go to market, and people can use it as a medium of exchange. So that was super interesting for us. But then we kind of were like, okay, this is awesome. We've got money, we've got electronic cash, if you will. How do we actually make it usable to the everyday person? And so that's when we stumbled across Connext. And Connext being like the first live state channel network on Ethereum, and being able to actually use DAI and send it around instantly was super compelling for us. So that's why we have established this kind of long-term partnership with Connext. In the process of working with you guys, like for the user, it's completely magical, right? Our two products combined make this magical experience of just like, oh, you've got money now on your device, it just appeared there, and you can send it anywhere you want. It's very magical. The underlying technology that actually makes it work is also quite fascinating. I've been learning so much by working with you guys. The way I actually think of it now is like basically Connext is creating quantum payments, where like you basically have like this transaction and you don't know if it's like on chain or off chain, but it like works, and like only by like observing it in the sense of like kind of like disputing it, if you will, it becomes one state or the other. So I don't know if you could give like a kind of a simplified version of how the Connext technology works. I think that would be really super interesting for people.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think you kind of hit a lot of good points there, but state channel technology is very interesting, and as you mentioned, it can be like a little bit complicated once you dive into the layers and unpack it a lot. But kind of at its core, the way we kind of like to explain it is it's kind of like a bar tab. So you open a tab at a bar, and then you keep buying drinks on this tab, and then you say, okay, just add this to my tab. And then at the end of the day, like you settle up with the bartender. So the same way you do that on a state channel, where you initially like create your state channel, which is the one step you do on chain. So once you create your channel on chain and commit some funds to that on chain. So say I open a channel with you, Tom, for 1 Ether within the channel. I put my 1 Ether up. Then I can do everything off chain within that channel. I can send you like, or let's say DAI, 10 DAI. Then I send you 1 DAI, 2 DAI, 3 DAI. Then you send me back another DAI. And then like we go back and forth for, however long we want to. And then finally at the end of the day, I end up and I have 3 DAI, you have 7 DAI. And I say, okay, well, this is where I want to end our channel. So let me just take out what I have right here. And all that computation is happening off chain, which is kind of like where the whole scaling part of it goes. Because as we talked about earlier, the scaling issue goes when you try to put these transactions on chain. So when you do all the transactions off chain, then essentially you're infinitely scaling. You're scaling to the speed of the internet, which is how you want to be.
That's a really great analogy. It actually is basically how the Visa credit card network got started, right? Like back in the day, like in the 50s and the 60s, they had department stores, and everybody had basically like an open credit line with each department store. And like, so it was a bunch of like, kind of like off-chain, state channels, if you will, with each department store. And then what happened is that people wanted to actually trade their credits or their debts with, between department stores. And then they had to come together and find a way for all the department stores to like be able to settle their debts and obligations between each other, so that their customers could kind of like move this credit around more freely.
Oh, wow. And that's where that's really interesting.
That's how Visa was born. And so Visa, what was happening back then is like each department store wanted to become like the standard, like they wanted to be the bank, if you will. And so they wanted all the other department stores to work with them. But since they all wanted to do it, like obviously they wouldn't collaborate with each other, because like by collaborating with someone else's network, that makes them the winner of like payment space, right? So what happened was this guy left one of the department stores and started Visa, the Visa network, and it's a completely it was like a neutral organization. And he basically brought all the department stores to the table, and like they had all like started issuing like different credit cards of their own stuff. Brought them all to the table, and he was like, "This is the neutral Visa network, and we're all going to use it. Like that's just the way it's going to be." So that sounds like kind of what you guys are doing. And in your analogy, like you guys are establishing a credit, like basically establishing a bar tab, right? But what happens when you want to use your your line of credit with the bar tab at like other merchants, or have that transaction with other people, right?
Yeah, you exactly hit it on the head. So then all these other merchants now will have their own channel with us. And then, once they're part of the network, like, I mean, the way you're kind of describing it, Visa is a centralized entity, which we're not trying to be. So we're trying to build a decentralized network. But I mean, at its core, it kind of looks the same. When you have one node, it looks like this Visa is the one node. Everyone's connected to this one node, and then they can all pay each other through that one node. But then when you have like multiple nodes everywhere, then that's when it becomes a decentralized network, because all these nodes can kind of hop their channels across each other. And then that's, it gets a little more complicated from that, but essentially it's the same core thing where you have a tab open with the network, and then you can pay anybody else within the network through this state channel network, and everything's happening off chain. And then in the end, the idea is that, like you said, you'll have different types of merchants all attached to this network. So, you'll have like a bar tab that you can open where you can buy beer, but also like the coffee shop is also attached to the network. Also, like all your friends are attached to the network, so you can pay peer-to-peer through like Mosendo, things like that. So you can do peer-to-peer payments, peer-to-merchant payments, service payments. You can pay your like electrical bills. You can pay your IoT devices. All your IoT devices can pay each other. That's kind of like our end goal and vision. And none of this really has to hit the chain unless there's like some dispute or something bad. That's kind of the goal. So really, like, that's kind of what the real beauty of layer 2 is that, like, in the happy case, like when everybody is doing the right thing, you never have to go to the blockchain. The blockchain is basically like a Supreme Court, you only get there if something really wrong happens. Otherwise, you just keep everything off chain, and you can always resolve it off chain. And basically, having the threat of going to chain is enough like economic incentive to stay off chain.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you bring up like an interesting point. Like, if everything's happening off chain, does that mean that like the people that are interacting on the Connext network, does that mean they have to trust each other? Like, do I have to trust the bar, or does the bar have to trust me in order to transact off chain?
That's a great question, and no, they don't, because of a couple constructs. Because since you as like yourself or the patron of the bar are storing all your receipts, essentially, each of these state channel commitments can be thought of as a receipt. So you have every receipt for yourself. The bar also keeps its own copy of all the receipts that it has. So if ever there's like a dispute and the bar, let's say like the bar goes to the blockchain and says that you owe them like $10, but in reality you owe them like $7. And then they try to go to the blockchain and say, here, look, I have this old receipt that says Tom owes me $10. Then you can go and you can say, well, no, actually I have this like later signed receipt that says I only owe $7. And this was signed later, so obviously this is like the right one. And then you can present that evidence to the blockchain. And that's essentially how like an adjudicator, which is like the dispute layer, works.
That's cool. So like in the non-blockchain world, like you would basically have all these contracts keeping track of who owes you money. And then if there's a dispute, then you have to spend a bunch of time and money. Like maybe you go like meet Judge Judy, and then she decides like who has to give you money, right? And so what you're saying is you've taken that like 6-month process and made it happen in basically one block on Ethereum, right?
Exactly.
So
and that's kind of the whole beauty. That's the whole beauty of blockchain and smart contracts, is you essentially turn these like entities that are like basically middlemen into like code, and it's all running on code. It's all verifiable, all provable, all immutable. And that's really the beauty of Ethereum and smart contracts. And we're fully embracing all of that. Even though we're not using the blockchain, even though we're layer 2, we're still embracing all the power of Ethereum off chain.
That's really great. I will say that when I record some how-to videos for the DeFi Nation group, and when I'm going to like send some DAI to Compound, for example, I learned early on I have to pause the recording and wait for the transaction to confirm because otherwise the video is just like 45 seconds of me trying to come up with stuff to say.
Yeah.
But when we've used the Mosendo proof of concept, it is like faster than it's like I'm looking at the sender's phone and then all of a sudden it's on mine. And it's really gratifying to understand that I have the same level of security and decentralization, but with those results is really gratifying.
And if you look at things like centralized systems like Apple Pay, like I use Apple Pay all the time and it's just instant. I just tap my phone and bam, it works. And that's what we're up against. And that's really what we need to get the user experience level to, or else this will never work. And, Tom, that like Mosendo, you guys iterate on user experience all the time. And that's why, you guys have been working with us so closely. And, that's why we're all excited to get this stuff working in Mosendo as well, because it just makes it instant and magical, like you said, Clayton.
Yeah. And I think I'd like to think about this in the context of the DeFi space. So like right now I have DAI on Compound Finance and on Dharma, and I'm earning interest. And I think of that as basically like my savings, like I'm earning interest on my savings. But when Mosendo's live and we have these connections built, we can earn interest like on our checking, like on actual spending money. And I guess I'm curious, Rahul, what other directions you see Connext enabling as far as DeFi goes, and maybe what interest you have in that space for Connext?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it does get a little more complicated since you're not storing things on chain, like in terms of interest and things like that. We have thought of some ways to do like kind of synthetic assets and things like that, where you can kind of like back off-chain assets with collateral within your channels. I think that's a whole nother thing we need to dive into. But one way actually we do have to potentially make interest is when you run one of these nodes. So if you run, basically the way the whole state channel system works is that these nodes provide collateral for the actual system to be liquid. So like we were just talking about one-to-one channels, like me to Tom. So essentially, if I'm paying Tom in a channel, but then if I'm paying Clayton and Tom has a channel with Clayton and I have a channel with Tom, then I can actually use Tom to pay Clayton. It's like a one-hop channel. And in order to do that, Tom would have to put up collateral for me to pay. Essentially, he would have to have as much money in his channel as I wanted to pay. So using that whole collateral concept, you can see how like these nodes would actually need to provide quite a bit of collateral in order to maintain like the liquidity of the network. And we've thought of ways where you can actually have these nodes charge a little bit of an interest rate so that they can kind of make money. And that's how like Lightning Network works essentially on Bitcoin, is these nodes are charging like minuscule amounts of transaction fees. And that's probably the first way that we'll actually be able to kind of like monetize things within the network and incentivize node providers to actually like host nodes. And of course, that'll be a competitive market. But that's kind of like the first way we see it. And of course, since we're built on smart contracts and Ethereum, there's a lot of use cases that we still haven't even unlocked and are potentially there.
Let's unpack that a bit. So you've introduced this new term, which is a node, which is, I guess, in the Connext parlance, that's quite similar to your analogy of the bar or the merchant that you're keeping a line of credit with. So it sounds like what you guys are doing is kind of separating that agreement to kind of keep a line of credit open from the merchant itself. So, and then that becomes a node, right? So then the user, the customer keeps this relationship with a node, keeps a line of credit open with them. And so that actually becomes a completely separate business, is like the nodes that are keeping track of customers' credit within the network. And then the merchant, the vendor, the bar, whatever, they don't need to run that technology in order to keep that line of credit open. They just become also a customer of these nodes. Is that about right?
Right, exactly. And then nodes are the ones that essentially handle like the routing and the collateral. So like they're keeping track of something completely different than what these like merchants are keeping track of, right? Exactly like you said. So they're kind of the ones who are managing like the network itself.
And so then these nodes become, the nodes are basically, they're in an open network, right? So anybody can be a node.
Exactly.
And
That's where like the decentralization comes in, because anybody can be a node, and we're expecting like, many nodes. So that's where kind of you get uncensorability and decentralization.
got it. So then it becomes like a little bit analogous to a Bitcoin miner, if you will, right?
Right. Exactly.
So it's doing like different work, but
Yeah.
in the sense that these nodes are helping to keep the network going. And so it
Right.
sounds like these nodes are creating an entirely new type of business. So
Exactly.
once basically people will be able to set up a node business on Connext and have a new way to earn some money just by running one of these nodes.
Exactly.
Nice.
That's pretty awesome.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, we're leaving it up to the node operators for how much they want to charge fees. So then that'll kind of like provide some kind of market within itself where you can kind of shop around and see which node you want to connect to based on the amount of fees you want to pay. And then these nodes are going to have to be competitive with each other in terms of that.
Sure.
So it'll be interesting, and we're going to scale this up slowly. So we'll start the first version of the network V2 that we launch is going to have one node, which we will operate at first. And then very quickly after we launch the one node network, we're going to launch a 10 node network where we're just going to have some like trusted friends that we know who are just going to run nodes for us. And we're just going to see how that plays out in terms of like the routing, collateral, things like that, like all these issues that we don't really know about yet. And then from there, we're just going to launch into full decentralization. That's kind of the roadmap with us.
Sure. That seems to be a smart way to do it that I've seen other organizations do, where you have to start out, where you have like a little bit more troubleshooting ability in the beginning before you just kind of like let it go free, and you need that time to iron out a couple issues sometimes.
Exactly. I hate to use the word centralization here, but since it is a single node system, there is a point of failure. However, like we talked about earlier, you don't actually have to trust us at all, even though we are operating the node. The only thing we can do is stop a payment from going through. So we can never take your money away. We can just basically like hold it with us. Or if our node is down, then you can't maybe send a payment to somebody else, but you can always pull your money out on chain.
Got it. So your money is always safe. And then just if there's a problem, then maybe you can't send it on Connext. You have to send it on chain.
Exactly.
So it doesn't get stuck or anything like that. If there's a problem, it goes slower.
Exactly. Then
So
you
that's
don't
the
get
worst
the
case.
magical service that Connext provides, the magical feeling service.
Cool. That seems pretty low risk.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thanks for explaining that to us, Rahul. Is there anything else that you think people should know about Connext? People in the DeFi community?
I guess, well, one thing is we have just launched with MetaMask. So we have version 1, which is version 1 is the version that's running in Mosendo right now. So that was kind of our first iteration of what Connext looks like, of this full, it was basically the first mainnet payment channel network. So we launched that a few months ago. We got Mosendo on board with that. Now we've recently launched that with MetaMask through this InstaPay feature. So if you get the mobile app for MetaMask, you can actually download the beta mobile app now. They're in public beta. And InstaPay is a way where you can actually pay DAI to anybody else within a payment channel. And it feels, you can get all those like very instant payment feelings. So I advise everyone to check that out. Of course, check out Mosendo's app as well. Their stuff is working great, and it's also on mainnet and live. And we're very close to launching V2, which is the first version of our Connext network, which will provide many more benefits, including generalized state. So instead of just doing one-to-one transfers, we can actually allow now things like conditional transfers. So you can use like a conditional transfer that's based on like a time lock or like an API. So let's say you want to only unlock this payment after a certain amount of time. We allow you to do that, or any condition you specify. Say you want to like unlock this payment based on the result of like a baseball game. So then you could plug that into like some kind of API that you have and say when the result of this API happens, then we'll unlock this payment.
I see.
And of course, games on the blockchain will unlock, you can do things like tic-tac-toe, but it's on the blockchain since it's using Connext network channels, it's all off chain, so it's instant. So it feels like you're playing a game on like Yahoo Games or something like that, but it's all secured by the blockchain, all decentralized, trustless,
So
everything like that.
does that mean that you can give approval for toll payments or subscriptions? Is that an application for that?
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
Subscriptions is something we're going to launch really quickly after this. So all these kinds of use cases that it opens up. So that's what we're really excited about. We're like knee deep in getting this done. We're probably like, few days away from getting it launched on testnet. So really excited.
One other interesting piece that I had heard about it. I think that privacy is coming in Connext V2 as well. Is that true?
Yes. We're researching ways that we can make things much more private. Since we're so for V2, we're building on Counterfactual's framework. So their base level channel protocol is what we're using, and then we're building basically all the like SDKs, all the node infrastructure, the full network routing, collateralization algorithms, all that stuff. And then we're kind of outsourcing the base layer to Counterfactual, who is doing a great job on like the research end and unifying its spec and things like that. So with them, we're working on ways to build privacy, in which we have always been like privacy first, and we want privacy enabled in our channels ASAP. So that's something we're gonna look into as well.
Awesome. So that'll make Connext like GDPR compliant then.
Yes. That's a good point as well. GDPR compliant. So I'll circle back and make sure that I think we should research ourselves and make sure that we can get it to GDPR compliance like as soon as possible, because that would really help.
That would be a good feature to have, I think.
Right, definitely.
So Rahul, the question I like to ask everyone is, so you're at like a holiday dinner and you're with your distant family, and maybe an uncle you don't see very often and doesn't know about crypto asks you what you do for work. How do you answer that question at the holiday dinner? How do you answer it?
Oh man, that's a funny one. Well, it depends also. Like I say, first of all, I'm like, oh, I have a blockchain startup I work for. And they're like, what's blockchain? I'm like, oh, like Bitcoin. They're like, oh, okay, so you have your own like cryptocurrency. I'm like, no, not really. Then I try to go into things a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, so Ethereum, what Ethereum is, it's like Bitcoin, except you can do more with it. You can do things like, you don't have to just do payments. You can secure like your identity records. You can have housing. Like, so I try to kind of like give a few like real world examples that they'll understand. I like the identity and the housing a lot because I think that it kind of explains these like non-monetary related ideas around Ethereum. So if I can get them to wrap their head around that, then I say, this is what Ethereum is. And I work with Ethereum and I work on scaling Ethereum essentially. So, I mean, it's a lot. And of course, some of them just like glaze their eyes over, but the ones who are interested will kind of follow along a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I'm always curious for people that go for the like, oh, I work with a tech company, or they're like, okay, the rest of this meal is about cryptocurrency, like just accept it or take a nap. But like, that's what we're talking about now.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just want to avoid those conversations altogether. Or the guys will be like, oh man, I lost so much money in that. And it's like, okay, well, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I don't even want to bring up price.
Yeah. But my dad and my brother are like, okay, what new coin should I buy? I'm like, just keep holding Bitcoin and Ethereum.
Yeah. If they ask me what to buy, I just say buy Ethereum. It's low still.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Rahul. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. Again, Rahul is the CTO of Connext Network. And it was really great hearing about your product. And I love seeing the implementation with Mosendo. So keep up the good work.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, guys. It was great. Talk to you guys soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.